or may not have heard of the blues scale before. It's a 6-note scale that tries to sum up the essence of playing the blues. But did you know there's not just one blues scale? In fact, there are 8 scales in particular that are closely associated with playing the blues, and especially jazz blues in particular. Let's go over them. Okay, so first let's quickly go over the blues form just to make sure we're all caught up to speed here. So taking a look at this C blues, this is the most basic 12-bar form of a blues. And it starts with, in the case of concert C, in C7, which is the 1 chord. Then it goes to F7, which is the 4 chord, back to C7 again, which is the 1 chord, and then to G7, which is the 5 chord, back to the 4 chord, and then finally back to C7, the 1 chord. That's a basic blues song form. Now in jazz, we add a lot more chords to the basic blues here, but for the sake of talking about the blues scales, let's just kind of stick with thinking about this one. So let's talk about these 8 blues scales you absolutely need to know, but first, my scales disclaimer. A scale is simply just a sequence of pitches, right? And that's really all it is. It's a sequence of pitches that can help us organize and better understand how music works. Scales can also help us learn how to play our instruments better. However, scales are really just that, scales, and we need to learn how to make them musical. So all the scales I'm about to go over, it's really up to us to figure out how do we make these into music. And definitely stick to the end of the video because there's a really important lesson about scales that's gonna kind of open your mind a little bit. So stick around to the end for that lesson. Blues scale number 1 is the major pentatonic scale. So the major pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale, penta meaning 5, and it sounds like this. So the major pentatonic sound is one kind of sound like that uses the major third there, right? It's root, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and then back to the root again. It gives us that open majory kind of sound, but hints a little bit at the blues. So it's one tool that can be used. Of course, you can always change the scale you're playing when you change the chord. So for example, when we go to the 4 chord, we could play the F major pentatonic scale. Or you could technically play the C major pentatonic scale over the entire blues form. Just keep in mind, like I talked about with scales, that's not really going to give you the full idea of what the blues sounds like, hence why there are 7 other scales to go. Scale number 2 is the minor pentatonic scale. So the minor pentatonic scale is once again a pentatonic scale, so meaning 5 notes in the scale. And the difference here, of course, is that now we're in the minor realm, which insinuates there is a flat 3rd in there. So it sounds like this. So we've got the root, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, the flat 7, and of course back to the root again. So again, slightly different here than the major pentatonic scale, giving us more of that kind of darker, even bluesier sound. Right? Almost like you could play that over a minor 7th chord if you wanted to play that over a minor blues, but of course over a dominant 7 regular blues, major blues, works perfectly fine. Again, you could play this scale over top of all of the entire form, and this one actually fits just a tiny bit better than if you were to play the major scale over the whole form. But again, you could also think of it in terms of, here's the 1 chord, the C7, then we go to the 4 chord, we can play an F minor pentatonic scale. But again, I'll remind you that this is only one kind of sound that you can play over a blues. So let's go to the next one. Okay, but before we move any further, obviously, like I mentioned before, these are just scales. How do we make them musical? How do we turn them into great improvisation? Well, I have a free guide called the Jazz Improv Made Easy Fast Track Guide that goes over exactly that. It's completely free. Leave it down in the description down below. So definitely go check that one out. Scale number 3 is the minor blues scale. So here's where we get into what we call hexatonic scales, meaning they have 6 notes in them. And the minor blues scale is really what a lot of us know as the blues scale. It sounds like this. What makes this scale particularly bluesy is the addition of the flat 5. So if you're paying attention here, we start with the root, the flat 3, the 4, right? Kind of just like the minor pentatonic, but then we add the flat 5. Oh, so you could also call it the sharp 4, right? And then the 5, right? So we have this whole, basically a chromatic passing tone, if you want to call it that, to the flat 7, back to the root. And that flat 5, we also call in blues and jazz, the blue note is what gives it that really big tension that blues and jazz is really known for. But of course, that's only one sound here that we can use with these hexatonic scales, so let's go to the next one. Blues scale number 4 is the major blues scale. So here we have the brother, cousin, whatever you want to call it, to the minor blues scale. And of course, it's related to a major key, which means there's going to be a major third in there. So here's what the major blues scale sounds like. It sounds really good, like the classic lick, right? You've heard that lick before. That's kind of coming out of this sound. So we have the root, the second, and the flat 3 is acting as our blue note here, going into our natural 3, which makes it major, the 3rd, right? Then we have G, which is the 5th, A, which is the 6th, and back to the root again. So think a little bit more of the major pentatonic scale and how it relates to this blues scale. Just we are adding that blue note, which is the flat 3. Blues scale number 5 is the Mixolydian scale. So the Mixolydian scale is what we call a mode of the major scale. And while we're not going to talk about modes and what they mean, Mixolydian just means that it is associated to a parent major scale of some sort. So for example, C Mixolydian scale is actually associated with an F major scale. It's like playing the F major scale, but starting on the 5th tone, which is C. So it sounds like this. Now, what you may have noticed is it almost feels like it's going to be a major scale. So it's C is the root, and then we have D the 2nd, E the 3rd, F the 4th, G the 5th, A the 6th, but then we have the flat 7, and then the root again. So no major 7, it's a flat 7, so it's a major scale just with a flat 7 instead of a major 7. This is why the Mixolydian mode is also known as the dominant scale, right? You could play this particular scale over any dominant 7 chord, right? And it's going to sound good. And again, like we talked about before, like if we're playing a blues, yeah, we can play C Mixolydian over the 1 chord, but we can also play, you know, F Mixolydian over the 4 chord to make sure we hear the difference between one chord and the other. So this is a good one to be aware of, have in your bag of tricks. It's a little bit more of a general sound, but really hints at the dominant flavor that we're going for. Blues scale number 6 is the country blues scale. So this scale is called the country blues scale, and that's because it's most often associated with country blues guitarists. Sounds like this. And I really like to think of this one as a mixture between the major blues scale and the Mixolydian scale. I'll show you what I mean. So we have the root, we have the 2nd, we have the flat 3, we have the major 3, and we have the 5, and then we have the 6, okay? That's exactly like the major blues scale, except for now we add the flat 7 and then back again to the root, right? So that flat 7 is an added note that's coming from that Mixolydian scale there. So the combination of them adds for that extra dominant sound, but that twangy thing that really comes from country as well. Blues scale number 7 is the bebop dominant scale. The bebop dominant scale comes from the parent category of scales called bebop scales, which are, again, an attempt to sort of conceptualize some sounds or ideas that are heard in the style of jazz, particularly bebop, pioneered by Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and of course many others. And it sounds like this. So I like to think of the bebop dominant scale as a Mixolydian scale with an added quote-unquote blue note in it, or chromatic passing note. So it goes like this. We have the root, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the flat 7. That's just like a C Mixolydian scale, but then we're gonna play the major 7 to the root again, right? So really that major 7 is just acting as a passing note, right, to connect the other notes together. This happens in bebop a lot, hence why it's called a dominant bebop scale. Blues scale number 8 is the super blues scale, also known as the Frankenstein blues scale. So the super blues scale brings in our huge lesson that I was talking about at the beginning of this video about scales. And that is that, again, scales are really just ideas to help you organize tones that can be used over chords and chord progressions. More on that in a second. So let's play the super blues scale, or the Frankenstein scale. So we have the root, the second, the flat 3, the third, the fourth, the flat 5, the 5, the 6, the flat 7, the major 7, and then the root. Okay, so if you're paying attention, this is sort of almost like a chromatic scale, but not really. Or the other way you can look at it is it's, again, a Frankenstein scale. It's the combination of pretty much all of the scales we just talked about. Now, where this really starts to blow your mind a little bit with jazz improvisation is this. And that is that really, when it comes to it, you can play any note that you want over any chord. It really just comes down to how are you going to resolve these notes. And that's why not any one of these blues scales is going to sound great over any one given chord or the entire blues form, because it's the combination of all these notes and these ideas and these sounds that great blues and jazz musicians are using to sound awesome over a blues. So knowing these scales is helpful and important, but learning how to make them musical and learning from recordings, transcribing, all the stuff that's probably recommended to you before is way more important than simply just knowing these scales. But these scales are an awesome starting place to get right into it. As I mentioned earlier, definitely download our free Jazz Improv Made Easy guide. Link in the description down below, up here on the screen as well, because I actually go through in that guide exactly how improvisation works, starting from the most basic thing you can think of, a major scale, and how jazz musicians go from that step to playing awesome solos. I show you exactly how that works. After you're done downloading that guide, check out this video here on the screen as well, called Jazz Improv Explained, because I sort of deep dive a little bit more on some of the stuff in the free guide as well. That's really going to help. So check out that video after you're done downloading the guide. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.